be a little more on the tablet manufacturing science. So I will first give some background introduction about tablet formulation and challenges, and then we'll give some examples, including the use of crystal engineering to improve tabletability, punch, thicken, and test. Those are all challenges, when you develop a tablet formulation. Then I'll give you a couple of case studies, and then we'll draw some brief conclusions. When you think about a typical tablet formulation, let's say it's an immediate release tablet, there are many things in there. Of course, the first thing you think about is the active pharmaceutical ingredient, API, or drugs. Sometimes it's one drug, but it's also possible you have multiple drugs combined in one tablet. And you also have the fillers, because typically drugs are not, most drugs are not in large quantity. Dose is not very high. You must have some material, inactive materials to fill the volume, so you can even see and handle the tablet. And these are a long list of excipients you can use as a filler. You have binders. Binder function to hold particles together. So you start with a fine powder. In the end, by the process of compaction, you can get this tablet dosage form. You also need to have a disintegrant, because even for the drug is soluble, but if the tablet doesn't disintegrate, it stay together as a whole, the surface area is very small. Therefore, the dissolution rate can still be slow. So you want to, once you take the tablet into the stomach, you want the tablet to fall apart. Therefore, the drug particles which have the chance to dissolve. You also have the flow aid. It has to do with the manufacturing. If the powder is poorly flown, imagine you're making tablets like a million tablets an hour. It's at very high speed. If your flow is not sufficient, you're going to have manufacturing problems. Sometimes you want to give the tablet a certain color, you add a colorant. Also, a lot of times materials, because you're making millions of tablets, in order to preserve the tooling, you want to reduce the friction force between tablet and dye. Therefore, you want to use a lubricant. So basically, ideas in the tablet formulation, you have several classes of materials there. You have active, you have some other functional excipients in order to assure a successful formulation tablet being manufactured. You can have some other ingredients, surfactant, polymers, pH modifiers. All these, each of these has certain functions. So the key point here is the tablet is a very complex material. There's many things in there, each serve different functions. So therefore the tablet formulation is complex, but this complexity is by itself is challenging. But in order to make the tablet, we also need to consider the process which you use to make a tablet. So the process, many steps. Each step has multiple parameters need to be considered. You can see the combination of materials, the formulation with process is very challenging. Because of this reason, the task of developing a truly optimized tablet formulation is quite a daunting task, actually. It's not very easy. That's why in the past, the pharmaceutical industry have been developing tablet formulation using an empirical way. This way, of course, by trial and error, they can develop something that works, can put on the market. But this process takes a lot of material, takes a lot of time. Actually, in the end, the quality of the product is still not guaranteed, because if something goes wrong, people don't know why. People cannot anticipate certain problems. So when you change the manufacturing machine, change the site, something's changed, all of a sudden the manufacturing process falls apart. So that's the drawback of empirical approach in developing formulation. So looking forward, a better approach is actually to really to use science, material science, to develop formulation. If we do that, the promise is that you can develop a high quality product using very little material, and you can do it very quickly, and you also can get a product of high quality. And the way to do that in our research, the guiding philosophy for us is a so-called material science tetrahedron. So in this concept, you always start from a performance. Either some performance you want, like you want a tablet to have certain strength, want to have some dissolution properties, right? Certain performance is desirable. Then you say, what kind of properties determine the performance? You understand that? Then you say, ask us the question, what kind of structure determines the property? So in fact, if you think about the structure, property, performance, the relationship is a traditional material science field. Is is well known as a material science triangle. In order to solve a problem or developing a new product, you always ask the question. It's starting from structure, property, performance. For pharmaceutical tablet formulation development, actually is also useful. Once you understand this, the science foundation of this work, you can start to using different various process and engineering process to achieve the goal. By using engineering, including crystal engineering, you can modify the structure of the material, which gives you the property you desire, and which leads to final desired performance. So that this can be used to either develop something new, or you can overcome some problems by doing this kind of thinking. So talking about the engineering, of course, if there are any problems with your formulation due to the drug properties, the most effective way is to do the API crystal engineering. You are trying to address the issue and solve the problem at its root. Because excipients, they are typically, their properties are well known, relatively stable, well characterized. Each formulation is different, is the API. That's why API crystal engineering can be quite effective. But sometimes, for all kinds of reasons, if appropriate crystal form, the crystal engineering was not implemented early on, and you are stuck with the API crystal form, which still have some problems, but you cannot go back in time to fix it because it is too much time, too much money involved. So if that's the case, the company has to stay with whatever suboptimal crystal form that they have chosen. In that case, you can do the particle engineering. You don't change the structure of the crystal form of your API, but you can start to use this crystal form, trying to make particles which you can mask or overcome the deficiencies lying in the API crystal. In some even unfortunate case, even the particle engineering was not, the opportunity was missed, and you actually identify problems later on during manufacturing, or maybe during the when you switch site of manufacturing. In that case, the formulation is locked, the process is locked. You really cannot do much to change the crystal or change the particles. In that case, you have to think about how do you change the process parameters. For example, if your tablet is too weak or some other issues, maybe you have to slow down the process and give the particles more time to deform plastically. I'll talk about this later, and therefore can give you a stronger tablet. But this is not last line of defense you have. So ideally, you want to start to right then at beginning to modify the crystal property of your API. So in order to manufacture a high quality tablet successfully, we will consider manufacturability, and this can be divided into multiple properties. We think about the tabletability, flowability, and other properties as well. So I'm going to touch on all of this today. So I like to start from the tabletability. So when you make a tablet, you always start with many particles that form a loose powder. So you put the powder into a die, you apply a pressure using punches, right? So during the course of compression, the stress is applied. Imagine the two particles they are next to each other, but before you apply any pressure, particles has a point contact, a very small contact area. But during compaction, both particles will deform under stress. Therefore, a large bonding area develops between the particles. But during the course of decompression, that's where you eliminate the compaction pressure at the end of the compression phase. So the fate of the contact area really depends on the property, particularly mechanical property of the particles. Imagine the material is elastic. If you imagine compression tablet using rubber balls, so they are elastic. The deformation here actually is reversible. So therefore, once you remove the pressure, both particles undergo recovery, and you still end up with a very small contact area. And in this case, the tablet is porous because once it recovers, this space also recover next to these particles. So tablet is porous and weak. But on the other hand, if the material is highly plastic, so whatever deformation occurs during this compression will stay. Therefore, the large bonding area between particles will survive the decompression process. In this case, this kind of tablet is dense and usually strong. From this discussion, and we can talk more about this, but it's a very simple model. We can appreciate that the particles should have some degree of plasticity. If there's zero plasticity, that means there's no permanent deformation, then it's unlikely you have a very good tableting performance for your powder. Of course, bonding area is only one piece of the equation, because even you have a large bonding area, if the interaction strength between particles is weak, the overall strength is still weak. So that's something we call the bonding area, bonding strength interplay. So ideally, you want to have both, not too extreme, both reasonably well, either strong or large. You have a strong tablet. So that's the basic concept of particle compaction. So here is talk about how crystal engineering can help overcome problems you see during compaction. This is one example early on in our research, in the line of research. So this one shows 3 lines. This figure is a tabletability figure. So you basically plot tensile strength of tablet as a function of compaction pressure. And normally, for typical material, you expect when you apply higher pressure, you will see there's more deformation, therefore tablets tend to become stronger. But in this case, for the metal gallet, it's a green line. So even up to a very high pressure, about 270 megapascal, pretty high already, the strength of tablets are not very high. If you try to apply even higher pressure, actually you cannot form intact tablets anymore. The tablet upon ejection is laminated or have some defects. So this material exhibits very poor tabletability. But if you form a Cocrystal with caffeine, so you can actually get a Cocrystal exhibiting much improved tabletability. So this you can see this the strength is high, and with increasing pressure, tabletability increases and it gradually level off. This is caffeine. This blue line is for caffeine. It also goes up, but once you go beyond certain pressure, you start to see the decrease. And this is the turning point had to do with some polymer form change with caffeine. This phenomenon is known as overcompression. That means when you apply even higher pressure beyond certain value, actually you lose this strength. It has deterioration is observed. So going back to the model I described earlier about the compaction, the reason for this poor tabletability of metal gallet is going back to structure. So this molecule has multiple hydrogen bonds, donors, and acceptors. So in a crystal, each molecule forms multiple hydrogen bonds with neighboring molecules. It's by analogy, you can think of the diamond, right? Each molecule is strongly bonded to other molecules. So this crystal is really hard to break and deform. That's why this crystal is hard. It doesn't undergo extensive degree of plastic deformation. Therefore, bonding area is small. But once you form the co-crystal with caffeine, you can see the crystal structure is a layer structure, and each layer is flat. For this kind of structure, you can think of analogies graphite, which is soft. It has layers, stacking layers. You can imagine for this crystal, if you apply a shear stress, the layers can undergo relatively easy slip, which is essential for plastic deformation. That's why by forming the co-crystal, this tabletability from poor to very good. So this just shows what crystal engineering can potentially do in terms of overcoming poor tabletability. We have done many other examples. They just the first one we studied, I think, illustrate the concepts well. So in this case, because of the softness of the co-crystal, then bonding area between particles is larger in the tablet. That's why this one exhibits a good tabletability. So another important property, actually another problem people commonly encountered during tablet manufacturing is the punch sticken. So punch sticken is you want to make tablets smooth surface. Punch should be shiny every time, so you can repeat compacting process without stopping the manufacturing process. But unfortunately, when the punch sticking occurs, the punch surface material is transferred from tablet to the tip of the punch. And this just shows two examples of that, and they're quite severe. But you can imagine the tablet, once the material is transferred from tablet to punch, the tablet surface is not smooth anymore, right? You will see the defective tablets like this. So punch sticking occurs, commonly occurs. So it's a big problem for the industry to overcome. By doing the crystal engineering, I have one example here. This one is for the celecoxib. So this black line is for the API itself, celecoxib. These two lines represent two different pressures, 100 megapascal, 250 megapascal. So this is a relatively sticky compound. When you compress it, the material is transferred to punch easily. But now if you prepare a co-crystal with proline, and this celecoxib proline co-crystal exhibits much reduced punch sticking propensity. So this one makes the formulation possible. You can really, if you want, you can increase the drug loading without risking punch sticking. So this is one example. Other example is you can do this through salt formation. So here, this example is acid sulfame. So this one is not a API itself, but it's used as a sweetener in tablet formulation. And you can form, acid sulfame can be used as a salt former or co-crystal former, and it depends on the drug. Sometimes it forms undergo proton transfer, sometimes it doesn't. So it can be either salt or co-crystal. But because this one is an artificial sweetener, it has a very intense sweetness. Therefore, if you can imagine if your drug is bitter, you can form the salt or co-crystal with your drug using this molecule. You can hopefully mask the bitterness. I have one example later. But here, in terms of the punch sticking, so because the salt formation, in this case, the potassium salt of acid sulfame, when you make the tablets of this material, you can say the free acid undergo quite obvious sticking to punch, but for this salt, it's clean. So the punch sticking propensity is much reduced. We have this reference here. We have done some detailed surface characterization, everything, and also crystal structure analysis, try to explain this. But here I don't go to detail. Just shows, by forming a different salt, it's possible you can overcome punch sticking propensity problem. So in this case, the punch thickness is reduced by formal salt. This is similarly is more quantitative data to compare the punch thickness propensity. So this one is the the potassium salt, and this one free acid. You can see the much reduction once you form the salt. So now I like to present 2 examples, or maybe 3. One is very short. So in this case, the drug of interest is metformin. This is the molecular structure of the metformin. It's a base, organic base. So this one is actually widely prescribed. It's first-line drug for treating type 2 diabetes. On the market, the drug uses the hydrochloride salt in the commercial tablet. What we want to do is the drug is in terms of the pharmacological effects it's proven, right? There's a widely used for treating diabetes. So we want to develop a orally disintegrating tablet of this drug. The reason is that some people, maybe the elderly, they have difficulty with swallowing large tablets. And so if it's already disintegrating, they put a tablet in the mouth, then the tablet will fall apart, become fine particles, and then you can just swallow very easily. Or sometimes if you travel someplace, you don't have water, swallowing tablet without water is difficult. So those will be scenarios if people can benefit from this kind of ODT product. So there's some market there for this kind of the dosage forms. And we also want to use direct compression to make this tablet. The reason is compared to other granulation processes, this is direct compression. Just you mix your drug with the excipients, you just compress it. It's very straightforward. It's economic, lower cost. So if you can do it, do it. But to achieve this goal, there are some challenges we need to overcome. The first one is unfortunately, this drug is salty and bitter. So for this kind of drug, you can imagine, if you put this kind of drug in your mouth, you test this the bitterness, then you get maybe you can get the fault first time, you won't do it again second time, right? You spit out, never try again. So we have to overcome this challenge. And this drug is also high dose drug on the market. It has 2 dose strengths. One is 250 milligrams and 500 milligrams. This means if you use the direct compression process, the property of the drug will have a major influence on the property of the blend of the formulation. And unfortunately, this HCl salt exhibit poor tabletability and flowability. That means if your drug loading is high, the formulation will unlikely to be successful because the flow property is poor, tabletability is poor. You just cannot make tablet. So this is all challenges we need to overcome, and we decide to turn into this crystal engineering approach for help. Our approach was to form a sweet salt with acid sulfame. As I mentioned earlier, this metformin is organic base. Acid sulfame is organic acid, so they can through the proton transfer and acid-base reaction, you can form a salt. Indeed, they do form salt if crystallized very easily. We grow the crystal, we solve the structure to prove the proton transfer. So it is indeed a salt. Then the reason we choose this acid sulfame because it has is artificial sweetener, right? Our hope is to mask the bitter taste of this drug. So then we have prepared the salt. We made the tablet. We use the test panel to assess the bitterness of this this new salt form compared to the original hydrochloride salt. You can see the solid bars. So this is means the test after some time. We have these numbers. If number is 1, means the the person reports the salt is sweet. If it's 6, it's extremely bitter. So this distribution from sweet to extremely bitter. You can see for this metformin salt, hydrochloride salt, majority of people report is bitter or extremely bitter. So as expected, this is a bitter compound. But once you form the salt with acesulfame, you can see the taste profile is significantly improved. Majority of people report it as being sweet. So this is good news. That means we have the chance to develop an ODT product. So and in order to develop formulation, remember I mentioned we want to use the material science approach. So we always start with characterizing property of the API. In this case, we study the tabletability of the metformin salt. Compared to this hydrochloride salt, which exhibit poor tabletability, the tensile strength is low over a wide range of pressure. And this metformin salt gives a much stronger tablet. And this is good news, because this is high dose drug, right? Means we don't need to use a lot of excipient in order to have the formulation to exhibit acceptable tabletability. So the reason for this, as I mentioned earlier, when you look at we grew the single crystals, and we also quantify mechanical property using nano indentation. You can see so this one is elastic modulus plotted against the hardness of these crystals. These are different measurements. You can see the metformin salt exhibit both lower hardness and lower elastic modulus than the hydrochloride salt. Means this salt is softer. You can imagine that means it's more plastic, right? Using this very simple model I described earlier, so the more plastic crystal will give you will have more plastic deformation and give you tablets with with higher strength. And this explains why the metformin salt exhibit better tabletability than the hydrochloride salt. So this is good. This solves another problem we need to worry about, tabletability. But in order to make the tablet, we also need to consider flowability, because if you cannot feed the material into the dye successfully, as the same amount every time, then you don't have a good, successful commercial product. So in this case, this formulation we proposed. You have your acesulfame salt. You can see the high dose, high amount. And we use a binder, we use a disintegrant. We have this particular, I want to point out, of film silica. So this is based on some other particle engineering work we have done. We know at this point, if you coat your particles with nano-sized silica particle, you can significantly enhance flowability of your formulation. So that's why we, because actually we anticipate some flow issue. I show some data later. We, in the first formulation we tried, we decided to coat the whole formulation with a filmed silica, nano-sized silica. Here the mexturate is typical lubricant. This is a percentage. So you can see here's the flowability data. So for the metformin acesulfame, this is the shear cell data. This is the flowability index plotted against the major principal stress. So basically, the takeaway is if the line is lower, means the powder flows worse. So this red line here is reference material we use. Say if your flowability is better than this, which corresponds to Avicel or pH 102, is one of the very common excipients in the formulation. Then flowability is acceptable for the high-speed commercial manufacturing. If it's worse than that, you likely run into issue with the flowability. So we know this metformin is flowability is poor. Therefore, we use the nano coating approach in the formulation. So now, once you make the formulation, you measure flowability again. You can see the formulation exhibit flowability better than the reference material. That means the flowability should be adequate for high-speed tableting, which is good. And of course, for the formulation, we also look at the tabletability, because earlier we look at tabletability of the pure API, right? That's always your starting point. And when I say so the material science guided approach will be you always start understanding of your raw material, API material. And, you identify deficiencies, and you using the engineering approach, in this case, crystal engineering, to overcome it. So, but that's for API only. And based on the property of the API, you try to design formulation. So here is more like a verification. So we understand the property of the API, understand the property of the excipient. That's why we proposed that formulation I showed you earlier. But here we want to verify, what we propose is a, educated guess, right? So then here it shows the tabletability is indeed acceptable. Here the reason we know it's acceptable is you can see that you can get tablets with tensile strength higher than 2 megapascal at slightly above 200 megapascal pressure. So we have some other separate work before this point. We established 2 megapascal as a safe criteria, for the tablet to survive all kind of stress encountered in subsequent handling. So that's good news. But at that point, we only use make a small amount of material, small tablets, 8 millimeter, is cylindrical tablets, flat surface, round shape. So now we want to use actually unique tooling, which is close to what's likely to be used in commercial manufacturing. In that case, we want to say that once you change the tooling size, you want to use a larger tablet also to deliver the amount of drug we need. Things can change, right? So we want to verify the formulation will work, and we also need to identify the range of manufacturing parameters we need to use to assure success of the tablet product. So therefore, we consider two things. One is the friability of the tablet, and one is the disintegration time. And because for the already disintegrating tablets, for example, you cannot take a very long time for the tablet to fall apart. So you want to have very fast disintegration. And for the friability, of course, you don't want to be too high, because if you put the tablet in bottle, you put it in pocket, you shake it, you should not lose too many particles from the tablet. So there's the criteria in the USP. Should not be more than 1% in terms of the friability. So in our study, we make tablets using this unique tooling under a range of compaction force. Then we measure the friability using the standard USP method. You can see that when the pressure is low, force is low, the tablet is very weak. You can see the very high, 100% tablet falls apart. It becomes dust, right? But when the force increases, you can see the steep decrease in terms of the friability. Remember, this is a log scale. So we used a more conservative approach. We took the 0.8%. From this curve, we identify the force we need to use in order to avoid high friability. So in this case, it's 7.4 kilonewton. So that means any force higher than the 7.4 will be sufficient to give you strong enough tablet without too much friability. But unfortunately, if you use too high of pressure, you can see the disintegration time also increase very sharply. So we use 30 seconds as the cutoff. We don't want the disintegration time to be longer than 30 seconds. So actually, the shorter the better. So from here, from this curve, we identify, okay, the 12.2 kilonewton will be the upper limit. So if you use the force higher than this, you likely have a tablet which is too slow for this application. Now, by considering these two curves, we identify a window in which we can make tablets can still give us acceptable friability, fast enough disintegration. So we decide, of course, we choose the force in the middle. We choose the 10 kilonewton. Give you some room on either side for error. Then we take this unique tooling. We make the tablets, with a 735 milligram tablet, which gives you 250 milligram of the API. This is our shape tablets. It's not cylindrical anymore. Then we determine the disintegration time of this tablet. It's less than 30 seconds, which satisfies the criteria for disintegration time. The friability is less than 0.8%. This means our approach works really well. This is only one try, one formulation, one try. We identify the conditions which can be applied to make the formulation ready for commercial applications. So most importantly, we also had a test panel to assess the test of this formulation. It also passed this test. That means we now, just with one try, we have a commercial ready formulation. And this whole work took us 2 months. We used about 50 grams of metformin, and a bulk amount of this API was used to make this batch of tablets for the final assessment. So we didn't use that much material to come to this point, but this is more for verification of the quality of a product, of the process, and that's why we use 50 grams of material. So this is compared to the traditional way of developing the formulation. It's much faster, much less material consuming. So that was a good example, but later we try to use another example, which is sildenafil. I don't go into details. In this case, the second time we are trying to do this. Same idea. We want to develop an ODT tablet. Want to mask the test of the drug. And so we also choose to use the formula salt with acesulfame. Basically we successfully prepared a new salt in 1 week. We characterize it. We understand the property of the new crystal form, and then we use the new salt form into the tablet formulation. Going through a similar process, we were able to develop a formulation which is commercial ready in much shorter amount of time, only 2 weeks total. And you only use 5 grams of material. This case is short; it's less amount of material, largely because the dose of the drug is lower than metformin. So that's for the ODT. The last example I want to share with you is quite exciting. Actually, it's a different way of crystal engineering. With the salt formation, with the cocrystallization, we are actually changing the chemistry of the API. So you either have a conformer or salt former in the crystal. But if you cannot change the crystal form, if you have some issues, can you still overcome those through other ways? Answer is yes. One approach is a technique known as spherical crystallization. So this example shown here is ferritic acid. This material exhibits poor flowability. So you can this is a flowability index. The larger the number is, the better flow. So you can see with the placebo formulation, the flow is really good, right? I mentioned earlier, ISL 102 is a reference material. You want the flowability to be better than this. So you can see the placebo formulation exhibit very good flowability. But once you mix the ferritic acid active with into this placebo formulation, the matrix, you can see the sharp decrease in flowability. Once you go more than 10% of the active in the formulation, the flowability start to go close and below the minimum flowability required for high-speed tableting. So that's the problem, because the dose is too low. Loading is 10% is too low. So the reason for the poor flowability is explained by the SCM images. So this shows the active itself particles or crystals, and they are elongated like needles. You can imagine that during when particles are moving past each other, they have the tangle each other. This mechanism is very difficult to move, right? Also, the surface is not very smooth. That's why the flowability is poor. Once you prepare spherical co-crystal, the process that we used was so-called quasi-emulsion solvent diffusion method. There's some other methods to prepare spherical crystals as well. But in this case, we prepared a much more spherical crystal compared to this original shape. And these particles consist of bundles of crystals. These bundles radiating outward from the center of the spherical particle. This is look like if you look really closely. So although the shapes are different, but if you use the X-ray to look at the crystal structure, it's same phase. So they have identical part X-ray diffraction properties. So same crystal form, just the different particle, the shape different. Therefore, we expect this to have different properties, particularly flow property, right? Because the shape, we expect to see much better flowability, which was a problem for the as received API. So we look at this with taking this spherical crystal of the active. We look at the property by itself. We look at the tabletability here. Look at tensile strength versus the pressure. You can see that as received, the active is a red line. So you quickly rise and then plateau. So it's not great, but it's good enough. Because if you apply this 2 megapascal criteria, so it doesn't require much pressure to get a sufficiently strong tablet using the as received material. That means that this active does not have a major problem with tableting. But nevertheless, you compare to the spherical crystal, you can see that the tabletability is even better than as received. So it doesn't hurt to have this. So although it's not a problem, we don't need to solve it, but it is better by doing the spherical crystallization. Major question is the flowability. You can see the as received active is here. So it's below the reference material, below the line, which is AVCL pH 1 or 2. So that means the flowability is going to be poor. We cannot, as I showed at the beginning, we cannot have load too much of the active in the formulation without suffering from poor flowability problem. So, but with the spherical crystal prepared by QESD method, you can see the flowability is much enhanced. So it's definitely don't need to worry about it. So in this case, by doing the spherical crystallization without changing the crystal structure, we can get a powder exhibiting both better tabletability and flowability. So that's good news. And but in order to develop formulation, we want to know, we need to go consider beyond just the tabletability and flowability, right? We also need to consider disintegration time. If you want to tablet to disintegrate quickly in the stomach, you have to use some amount of the disintegrant. In this case, what we did was we mixed the spherical active with a different amount of disintegrant. This is the cross-povidone we chose. You can see that without any disintegrant, it takes forever for the tablet to disintegrate. It's basically just slowly dissolve. But if you add 0.25% disintegrant, it's still long time, nearly 15 minutes for the tablets to disintegrate. But you can see that the disintegration time drops very sharply with the increased amount of the disintegrant. So if we apply this 15 minutes as the upper limit, so we want to keep the disintegration time below this limit, then from this curve we can identify 0.75% of the cross-povidone will give you sufficiently fast disintegration of the tablet, and you don't need to worry about slow release. So that's why we identify 0.75% cross-povidone as a disintegrant in the formulation. Now we look at ejection force, because as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to hear the squeezing sound during the course of manufacturing tablet. One thing is the tooling will be worn out. Also, the tablet surface will be it'll be rough. It's not smooth, so that neither is good. So we want to have the low ejection force. In this case, if you use pure active, which is spherical particles, crystals, you can see the ejection force increases sharply with pressure. And if we set this 600 Newton for this kind of size of tablet, this is considered to be acceptable. You can see that very quickly this ejection force goes beyond that. Now, if we take the spherical crystal with mixed with 0.25% lubricant, which we choose as a magnesium stearate, it's very commonly used in the manufacturing tablet manufacturing. We can see the much reduced ejection force. Compared to red lines, black line is much reduced. Over at wide pressure, the ejection force is below 600 Newton. So we feel comfortable. So now, with all this information together, it suggests we can just use this simple formulation to deliver a tablet with 99% of the active, with 0.75% cross-povidone, the disintegrant, and 0.25% magnesium stearate lubricant. And this tablet should give us, based on what we have data we have shown before, it should give us fast enough disintegration in stomach, and it should make the manufacturing possible. The tabletability should be good, flowability should be good. We don't have any issue with the manufacturing. So therefore we prepare the formulation. Then we evaluated the tabletability of this formulation. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear the background noise?
You can continue, Calvin. You are now, you will have to unmute yourself. You will have to unmute. Hello, Professor Calvin. Professor Calvin, you will have to unmute. Just a minute.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know what happened. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, there was some noise, that's it.
I see. Okay.
Please,
okay. Go back to this formulation. So we prepared it and we evaluated the tabletability of it. You can see the at a relatively low pressure, we can go above the minimum required strength 2 megapascal. So that's good. And then in terms of flowability, you can see the flowability of this formulation is also much better than the reference material Avicel PH102. That all indicates flowability will be adequate for high-speed manufacturing. And we look at the friability. You can see the when the pressure goes slightly above, it's a very low pressure. You can get the friability is very low. It's not a concern. And then we look at the dissolution. Because the faster disintegration I showed earlier, the dissolution also is good. So it's compared to the without the spherical crystallization, the dissolution is comparable. It wouldn't lose the ability to dissolve. And this one actually also meets this criteria, standard for this active. So by doing this, we conclude manufacturability is good, performance is good. So it's 99% active. It's unthinkable in the past, and no one can think of this would be possible. But by doing spherical crystallization, by systematically evaluating property of the active, and we are able to come to this point. We can present this formulation with confidence. This formulation will work for an immediate release tablet. So with those presented, I like to draw my conclusions. So all the work I presented is ready to follow this concept of material science tetrahedron. So it is a useful tool in our work. I think it's actually in the industry, many companies start to adopt this concept to guide their own research. So it is useful for both research and product development. I hope this will be also useful in your research. I mentioned the several challenges that can be overcome by applying crystal engineering principles. It can be, by either co-crystallization, solid formation, or spherical crystallization, and we can overcome problems such as tabulability, test, punch thicken. Right? There are many other things, including dissolution, permeation. There are many examples there, but we don't have time to expand on those. Spherical crystallization is really a wonderful technique if you can do it properly. But I think our understanding of this technique is mature enough. I think it should be able to ready for adoption by the industry. Many companies are trying this actually. So this is particularly good for high dose tablets. Remember the example of 99% active. That's one example of that. So I liked, of course, all this work. It's very exciting to me. But without the help and contribution from my lab members and co-workers, it's not possible. So I thank them for their great contribution to this work. And I also like to thank organizations that have sponsored my research. Without their generous support, it's not possible. Even the greatest idea, just if you don't have funding, just cannot be done. And finally, I thank all of you for your attention. And I guess I'm ready for any questions you may have. Thank you.